My name is Nancy, and I'm 28 years old. If you looked at my life from the outside just a few months ago, you'd think I had everything. A high-paying job at a billion-dollar tech company, a luxury apartment in downtown Austin, a diamond engagement ring from one of the wealthiest men in the city, and parents who were celebrated as pioneers in the industry. People envied me. They called me lucky, successful, even spoiled. But no one ever stopped to ask if I was happy. The truth is, my life wasn't mine. It never had been. My parents, Amanda and Martin, built a tech empire called Davenport Enterprises. And from the moment I could walk, I was told I was their legacy, not their daughter. My father, Martin, was the cold, calculating CEO. My mother, Amanda, was a polished, sharp-tongued socialite who ran the public side of the company like a stage show. Together, they didn't just run a business. They choreographed every moment of my existence. Where I went to school, what I studied, the job I took, the way I dressed, the people I spent time with, all of it was carefully designed to protect and elevate the Davenport brand. Even my engagement wasn't my choice. Stephen Langston, charming, rich, heir to Langston Robotics, was handpicked by my parents. On paper, he was perfect. And the engagement wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. What I didn't know until later was that my parents had secretly arranged a $5 million merger bonus that would be finalized once I married Stephen. To them, it wasn't a relationship, it was an acquisition. And I was just the signature on the dotted line. The first crack in my perfectly controlled world appeared during what should have been just another busy Monday morning. I walked into Davenport Enterprises, my heels clicking against the cold marble floor, only to find the office buzzing with tension. Employees were gathered in corners whispering, phones were ringing nonstop, and the head of IT looked like he hadn't slept all weekend. There had been a data breach, a serious one. Sensitive client files had been accessed, and it was clear someone from the outside had slipped past our firewall. My father was furious. My mother was humiliated. This wasn't just a security issue. It was a threat to their carefully curated image. That afternoon, they brought in an external cybersecurity expert to assess the damage. I expected someone stiff and corporate. What I didn't expect was Alex. He walked into the glass-walled conference room with a quiet confidence. No expensive suit, no briefcase, no fake smile. Just jeans, a clean button-up, and a laptop slung over his shoulder. His presence was calm, focused, and unlike anyone in my world. "Hi," he said, offering a handshake with a genuine smile. "I'm Alex. Let's see if we can untangle this mess." At first, I dismissed him. I'd been trained to distrust outsiders, especially ones who didn't speak in corporate jargon. But as the hours passed and we sat side by side reviewing the breach, I noticed something rare. Alex didn't just understand the system. He understood people. He explained things clearly, never made me feel small for asking questions, and even cracked a few jokes that made me smile for the first time in days. Over the next few days, we worked late into the evenings. And slowly something shifted. One evening, long after most of the team had left, we sat in the break room with lukewarm coffee from the vending machine. I found myself talking, really talking about the pressure, the engagement, the way every part of my life felt borrowed. Alex listened. Not the way most people do, with half a mind elsewhere, but with full attention. Then he said something that I'll never forget. "Life's too short to live for someone else's version of success," he said, his brown eyes meeting mine. "You deserve to be happy, Nancy. Not just useful." His words stayed with me. Long after he left that night. Long after the breach was resolved. They echoed in my head every time I looked at my engagement ring. I had spent my whole life being useful. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to choose happiness. After the breach was resolved, Alex and I kept in touch. A few texts here, a coffee there. He had no agenda, no strings attached, and yet every interaction felt like fresh air after years of suffocation. I began to realize how different he was from Stephen. Where Stephen spoke of quarterly earnings and growth projections, Alex talked about passion, ethics, and building things that mattered. But my parents noticed the shift in me. They could sense my hesitation about the engagement, and it didn't take long before their concerns turned into warnings. One night, my father summoned me to his study, a cold, mahogany-lined room that always smelled faintly of leather and silence. He sat behind his massive oak desk, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "Sit," he said firmly, not looking up from the document in front of him. I sat. He closed the folder and looked at me like a man preparing for a business negotiation. "Nancy," he began, "I've noticed you've been distracted. Let me remind you that this engagement isn't just about you. It's about the future of Davenport Enterprises. A future that your mother and I have sacrificed everything to build." He leaned forward slightly. "If you walk away from Stephen now, you'll be walking away from more than a marriage. You'll lose your position at the company, your financial support, your inheritance. Is that what you want?" His voice was cold, transactional, like I was a failed investment. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But inside, something in me cracked. As I walked out of his study, my mother was waiting in the hallway. She grabbed my arm tightly, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. "Do you understand what you're doing?" she hissed. "We've spent years making sure this merger would happen. You don't get to throw it away for some fleeting crush." I looked at her and saw, maybe for the first time, not a mother, but a woman obsessed with control. That night, I met Alex at our usual quiet diner. I told him everything. The pressure, the threats, the suffocation. He listened just like always. And when I asked him, trembling, "What do I do if walking away means losing everything?" He didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "If everything comes at the cost of your happiness, is it really worth having?" His words hit me hard. And as I sat there staring into my untouched coffee, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of losing what my parents built. I was afraid of never building anything of my own. The day of the engagement party felt like walking toward my own execution. Everything was perfect on the outside. The Davenport mansion was flooded with golden light, polished marble, and the quiet hum of a live string quartet in the foyer. Waitstaff in black and white uniforms floated through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Laughter and polite applause echoed in every corner. My mother, Amanda, had spent weeks micromanaging every detail, from the imported orchids to the custom-engraved crystal flutes. My father, Martin, worked behind the scenes, shaking hands with investors and key board members, treating the night like a press release in disguise. They weren't celebrating love. They were sealing a deal. And I was the signature. As I stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing the gown my mother had chosen, I felt like a mannequin on display. Stephen stood waiting for me at the bottom, smiling in his tailored tux like he was already posing for Forbes. "You look beautiful, Nancy," he said as I reached him, offering his arm. "Thanks," I replied, voice hollow. As the evening went on, I was paraded around like a trophy. My mother introduced me to old friends, business partners, even a senator's wife. Every time someone toasted to the perfect union, my stomach turned. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And then it happened. As my father took the microphone to begin the official toast, his voice echoed across the marble hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us to celebrate not just a couple, but a future. One built on shared vision, strength, and legacy." I heard the words. I felt the room spinning. And suddenly, I knew I couldn't go through with it. Not one more second. I took a step forward and raised my voice, louder than I'd ever dare to speak in front of them. "I can't do this." The room fell silent. Heads turned. Champagne flutes froze in midair. "I'm calling off the engagement," I said clearly, my hands shaking. Stephen's smile dropped. My parents froze. I saw it happen in slow motion, the realization in their eyes that I wasn't just breaking off a relationship. I was breaking the script, and they were about to lose control. The moment the words left my mouth, it was like I had detonated a bomb in the center of the room. I could feel the shock ripple through the crowd. Some guests froze mid-sip, champagne flutes hovering in the air. Others looked around in confusion, waiting for someone, anyone, to laugh and reveal that this was just a publicity stunt or a bad joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was the first honest thing I had said in years. My mother's face drained of color, her perfectly applied makeup suddenly cracking beneath the weight of disbelief. Stephen looked like someone had smacked the back of his head. But my father, he moved fast. He stormed toward me with such fury in his eyes that I instinctively took a step back. His shoes hit the marble like thunder, and his voice roared over the stunned silence. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" He didn't wait for an answer. Before I could blink, his hand came across my face, open palm, sharp, and loud enough to echo through the hall. My cheek burned instantly, a fiery red mark already forming on my skin. A gasp spread through the crowd like a gust of wind. Someone whispered, "He hit her." I staggered back, my heels clicking unevenly on the polished floor. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood there, stunned. And then, Amanda snapped. She wasn't the calm, icy socialite anymore. Her eyes were wild, her breathing rapid. I could see her chest heaving beneath her custom silk dress. Her hands clenched into fists as she scanned the room, looking for something, anything. Her gaze locked on a tall, wooden music speaker standing beside the DJ setup near the edge of the room. One of the elegant sound boxes used to fill the hall with soft classical music. She stormed over, yanked it off the low stand with both hands, struggling under its weight, and turned toward me. "You ungrateful, selfish little girl," she screamed. And then she threw it. The speaker wasn't small. It was solid wood with internal wiring, probably 40 or 50 pounds. She didn't lift it high, but she didn't need to. The force was enough to send it crashing toward my head, the sharp corner clipping the right side of my forehead just above my eyebrow. Pain exploded instantly. I cried out, stumbling back as the weight of the impact blurred my vision. I felt warm blood trickle down my temple, mixing with sweat and disbelief. The crowd screamed, panic spreading like wildfire. "Oh my God!" She threw it at her. "She's bleeding." I heard glass break, chairs scrape back, voices rise in alarm. And then a new voice, steady, commanding, cut through it all like a lifeline. "Everyone stand back. I'm Officer Scott. I'm a police officer. Do not touch the victim." Out of the chaos stepped a man in a dark suit. I vaguely remembered him from earlier, a guest, perhaps a family acquaintance. But now, his badge was visible, and his tone left no room for argument. He was calm, but his posture radiated authority. He immediately pulled out a radio from his coat and spoke clearly into it. "This is Officer Scott. I need immediate backup and medical at the Davenport estate. Assault in progress. Victim is conscious but injured. 2 suspects, both parents." The room was in chaos. Amanda had dropped to her knees, hands shaking. Martin stood stiff and silent, face frozen like stone. But all I could feel was the throb in my head, the warmth of blood on my skin, and the quiet clarity settling into my chest. I had done it. I had exposed them. I sat slumped on a velvet bench near the entrance hall, the same one my mother had picked out from a French boutique 3 years ago. Now it was stained with my blood. My hand clutched a cloth napkin someone had passed me, already deep red from the cut just above my right brow. The pain pulsed sharply, but it wasn't the worst thing I felt. What hurt more was the silence from my parents. Not even an ounce of concern, not a single step in my direction after they struck me. They had stopped pretending. And so had I. Around me, the grand hall that had been the stage for their perfect performance had descended into whispers, phone flashes, and chaos. Guests scrambled away from the scene or stood frozen in clusters, unsure of whether to leave or stay, unwilling to align themselves just yet. But Officer Scott was composed. He knelt beside me, his badge still visible, one hand gently resting on my arm. "Help is on the way. Just stay with me," he said calmly. "You're safe now." I nodded, dizzy but focused. My head throbbed, and the world tilted slightly when I shifted, but I held on. Within minutes, the shrill rise and fall of sirens grew louder. Through the tall arched windows, red and blue lights splashed across the marble floors. 2 squad cars and an ambulance pulled up to the estate's circular drive. Uniformed officers and paramedics rushed inside. Martin tried to intercept the officers, his voice raised in protest. "This is a misunderstanding. She's being dramatic." Officer Scott cut in immediately. "She was struck across the face by her father in front of over 100 guests. Then her mother hit her with a wooden speaker. I personally witnessed the second assault and called it in myself. There are multiple witnesses and visible injuries. She's bleeding. This is not negotiable." The officers didn't wait for further argument. Amanda was still on the floor, her expression blank now. No more screaming, no more rage. Just silence, as though she knew there was no more saving the narrative. An officer gently pulled her to her feet, turned her around, and cuffed her hands behind her back. "You're under arrest for aggravated assault," he said, reading her rights as he escorted her through the shocked crowd. A second officer turned to Martin. "You're also under arrest, sir, for domestic assault." Martin's face didn't move. Not a single twitch. He allowed them to cuff him as well, too proud to resist in front of the audience he had once ruled. But I saw his jaw tighten, the only sign he was unraveling inside. The paramedics reached me next. One knelt beside me, pulling on gloves, while another opened a kit and clicked on a small flashlight. "We're going to take a look, all right?" the medic said gently. He cleaned the cut on my forehead, checking my pupils and asking questions about my symptoms: vision, nausea, dizziness. I answered honestly. "You're stable," he said, applying a fresh bandage. "No concussion symptoms, and the bleeding's controlled. We don't need to take you in unless you want a full scan at the hospital." I shook my head. "I want to stay. I want to see this through." He gave me a small nod of respect. As they helped me to my feet, I looked around the room, at the familiar walls, the chandeliers, the people who once smiled at me like I was royalty. Now, they stared like I was a stranger. I didn't mind. Officer Scott approached one last time. "We'll write up a full incident report. You should also contact a lawyer. You've got a strong case." I took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a pawn. I felt like a person. And I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. "I'm pressing charges," I said clearly, "against both of them." By the following morning, the headlines were already everywhere. Tech heiress assaulted by parents at high society engagement gala. Davenport scandal. Arrests made after shocking violence. Nancy Davenport speaks out. "I'm pressing charges." Clips from the engagement party had gone viral overnight. Guests had taken videos of the slap, the speaker being thrown, the blood on my face, even the police arriving. The footage played on morning talk shows, trended on Twitter, and flooded my inbox with messages, some supportive, some stunned, all disbelieving. But none of that mattered to me as much as the quiet walk I took that morning into a law office. The building wasn't flashy like my parents' headquarters. It was tucked between two old cafes downtown, with ivy crawling up the bricks and a wooden sign that simply read Miller and Lane, Criminal Law. I didn't need a headline. I needed help. Inside, I was introduced to Claire Lane, a seasoned trial attorney with eyes that missed nothing and a tone that instantly made you feel like someone had your back. She listened carefully as I told her everything from the years of control to the arranged engagement, the emotional pressure, and finally the violence at the party. She took notes quietly, never interrupted. When I finished, she closed her notebook and looked up. "You're incredibly brave, Nancy. What happened wasn't just unacceptable, it was criminal. And we're going to treat it that way." We began the process of formally filing criminal charges against Martin Davenport for domestic assault and public physical violence, against Amanda Davenport for aggravated assault with a weapon. Thanks to Officer Scott's direct witness statement, the on-scene police report, the medical documentation from the paramedics, and the countless guest-recorded videos, our evidence was airtight. Claire even tracked down 3 high-profile guests who agreed to testify as witnesses: a city councilman, a former judge, and a well-known philanthropist. The trial began just 2 weeks later. My parents pleaded not guilty, of course. Their legal team tried to spin the story, painting me as unstable, emotional, ungrateful. But the courtroom wasn't the boardroom. They couldn't manipulate the truth this time. I took the stand myself. I told the jury what it had felt like to grow up as a product. I described the pressure, the calculated engagement, and the feeling of being nothing more than a tool for wealth. I shared the threats made in the study, and I described in detail what it felt like to be slapped in front of 100 people and then hit with a speaker by the woman who once called herself my mother. When the footage was played, uncut and raw, the entire courtroom went still. And when the final witness, Officer Scott, stepped up and confirmed every detail in his calm, steady tone, I knew we were going to win. 2 weeks later, the judge delivered her ruling. In the matter of the state of Texas versus Amanda and Martin Davenport, this court finds both defendants guilty on all counts. Amanda was sentenced to 4 years in state prison without early parole. Martin received 18 months for assault, with an additional penalty for attempting to interfere with the investigation. They were handcuffed in court. There were no camera crews allowed. No flashing lights. Just justice, plain and pure. And for the first time in my life, I walked out of a courthouse free. Not from them, from who they tried to make me. From the silence I used to live in. I didn't wake up the morning after the trial feeling triumphant. I woke up feeling quiet. There was no crowd cheering. No cameras waiting outside. Just sunlight streaming through a cheap curtain in the corner of Alex's apartment, and the smell of burnt coffee from the kitchen where he always tried, and failed, to use the French press properly. He peeked in, toothbrush in mouth, hair a mess. "Coffee's awful," he mumbled, foam at the corners of his lips. But I made pancakes. I laughed, the first real, deep laugh I'd had in weeks. I wasn't in a penthouse anymore. I didn't have a personal chef or a walk-in closet or access to a 6-figure inheritance. But I had peace. And I had Alex. We spent that day walking around downtown talking about what came next. I didn't want to hide or start over somewhere no one knew me. I wanted to rebuild, right where everything had fallen apart. Alex had an idea. He'd been consulting for years, helping companies patch vulnerabilities, teaching them how to protect their data before it was too late. I had always admired the way he approached things, with logic, transparency, and just enough rebellion to challenge tradition. "You've got the analytics brain," he said. "I've got the technical side. Why not build something new?" It sounded impossible. It also sounded perfect. We started with nothing. Just 2 laptops, a shared workspace in a co-working building, and a name. NNA Secure Systems. Our motto was simple. Real security. Real people. Real integrity. While other firms focused on flashy AI and impenetrable paywalls, we built relationships. We showed up. We explained every step of the process. We didn't hide behind buzzwords or brands. Clients noticed. The first ones came from word of mouth, a small nonprofit, a startup in need of a secure platform, a local hospital worried about ransomware. Then came the press. Not for drama this time, but for innovation. We were featured in a cybersecurity journal for our open access policy on transparency reporting. A tech blogger called us the most human company in an industry built on code. And in the middle of all that growth, we were falling in love. Not the dramatic kind, not the movie scene rush, but the slow, steady kind. The kind that's built on showing up at 2 a.m. with a USB stick and pizza. The kind where someone remembers your coffee order and takes the call when you're too nervous to speak. The kind where silence between 2 people doesn't feel empty. It feels like understanding. We celebrated our first real milestone, signing a major contract with a national logistics firm, with grocery store cake and cheap champagne on the rooftop of our building. I stood there with a paper plate in my hand, laughing at something Alex said, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel owned or watched or controlled. I felt free. We kept working. We kept growing. And somewhere between a software rollout and a business expo, Alex and I looked at each other and realized we didn't want to keep building just a business. We wanted to build a life. We didn't plan a big wedding. After everything I'd walked away from, the last thing I wanted was another audience, another stage, another ceremony designed for press releases instead of promises.
So we did it our way.
On a Saturday morning in early spring, Alex and I stood in the garden of a small historic chapel just outside Austin, surrounded by trees, our closest friends, and not a single photographer. The air smelled like fresh earth and lilacs. A soft breeze moved through the grass as we held hands, our vows scribbled in our own handwriting on mismatched index cards. Alex looked at me like I was the only person on the planet. "You weren't built for anyone else's mold, Nancy," he said, voice steady. "You were born to break it. And I've never loved anything more than watching you become yourself. I barely got through mine without crying. With you, I'm not useful. I'm not a legacy. I'm just enough." We kissed under a wooden arch strung with wildflowers and fairy lights. The guests, barely 20 in total, clapped and cheered as if there were thousands. My heart felt full in a way it never had before. Our honeymoon wasn't in Paris or Santorini. We spent 3 days in a lakeside cabin with no cell service, eating cereal from the box and watching old movies. It was perfect. We came back recharged, focused, and even more in sync. But life had one more surprise waiting. A few weeks later, I stood in the bathroom staring at a little white stick with 2 pink lines. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat down slowly on the edge of the tub, hand on my stomach, breath caught somewhere between joy and disbelief. When I finally told Alex, he froze. Then he smiled, not big, not loud, but the kind of smile that says everything just changed. "We're having a baby," he whispered, falling to his knees and placing his hand on my belly. "You and me. We're going to do this our way." The pregnancy wasn't easy.
I was tired all the time.
My back ached. I cried over commercials and couldn't smell coffee without gagging. But every discomfort was matched by a quiet, steady joy. We talked about names. We read parenting blogs. We painted the nursery pale sage and filled it with soft blankets, calming music, and books we'd once loved as kids. And Alex?
He was a rock.
He rubbed my feet on long work nights. He came to every doctor's appointment. He left sticky notes on the fridge that said things like, "You are literally making a human. You're amazing." We tracked the pregnancy week by week. Month 4, she kicked for the first time, just a flutter. Month 7, Alex built the crib by hand. Month 9, I stood in the nursery doorway, hand on my rounded belly, and felt the deepest sense of peace I'd ever known. And finally, right on time, she arrived. Our daughter.
Nora.
7 pounds, 11 ounces. Dark curls. My nose. Alex's dimples. The first time they placed her in my arms, I cried, not just because of the overwhelming love, but because of the weight that lifted off my shoulders in that moment. The generational pressure.
The shame.
The trauma. It stopped with me. Nora would grow up never having to earn love. She would never be told to smile to save someone's image. She would grow up knowing that her worth wasn't in what she achieved, but in who she already was. Sometimes, in the still hours of the night, I find myself standing by Nora's crib. She sleeps with her tiny fist curled near her cheek, her breathing soft and steady, her eyelashes fluttering against skin that hasn't yet been touched by cruelty or expectation. The glow of the night light warms the room, casting soft shadows on the wall where a wooden plaque reads, "You are already enough." It's not just for her. It's for me too. There was a time when I thought love had to be earned. That success came only from obedience. That being valuable meant being silent, sculpted, and strategic. That my feelings were flaws, my dreams distractions, my voice a danger to the empire that bore me. But that girl?
She's gone.
And in her place is someone I finally recognize. I'm Nancy. Not Davenport, not a brand, not a pawn in someone else's story. Just Nancy. A woman who stood in front of the people who raised her and said, "No more." A woman who built something meaningful from the ground up. A woman who chose love, not just romance, but the kind that sees, supports, and stays. A woman who carried her past, honored her pain, and gave birth to peace. My parents never reached out after the sentencing. There were rumors, failed attempts to appeal, some hollow statements through lawyers. I never responded. I didn't need revenge. I had already won. My victory wasn't in watching them fall. It was in choosing to rise differently. Alex and I continue to grow our company. We've expanded, hired a small team, launched an outreach program to help women in tech who've been silenced or overlooked. It's one of the proudest parts of our work. But our proudest part? She's asleep down the hallway, her favorite stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. And every time I hold her, I know. The cycle ended with me. Nora will never grow up afraid to speak. She'll never wonder if her worth is tied to her usefulness. She'll never be treated like an investment. She'll grow up knowing what real love looks like, what real freedom feels like. And one day, when she asks about our story, I'll tell her the truth. Not the pretty version, the real one. About how I found my voice by losing everything. About how falling apart gave me a chance to build something better. About how, in a room full of people watching me break the script, I chose to become the author of my own life. And how that choice saved me. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more real, powerful stories like this one. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching.